Hi guys, Jenica here from Multispective, and I'm here to share with you an episode where I interview Kevin Smith. This is a bit of an intense episode. I have to give you guys some trigger warnings. Kevin Smith used to be a child welfare social worker in the US. He talks about his experience. He breaks down what it means to be a social worker in the US. He gives many examples of his time. He delves really deep into some of the very traumatic childhood cases that he worked with. He talks about how it triggered him personally. We talk about things like self-care as well and where he is right now. He's living in Shanghai, China, doing something slightly different, but still working with children. I think there's a lot to take away from this episode. And if you yourself are thinking about working in social work or in this field for children, this episode will be really useful for you. And we also talk about how what systems can be done, what families can do to better protect their children, and how we can give them a stronger, happier, better future. So stay tuned, enjoy the episode, and please don't forget, drop a comment below letting us know what you think. Hey, Kevin, welcome to Multispective. I'm so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much, Jenica. Thanks for having me.
So, listeners, Kevin is a good friend of mine. I actually have known him pre-podcast episode. We have worked together on some kind of capacity, and really exciting to share this episode. It's slightly different take from what we usually do. This one is more focused on sort of a career path that he's chosen and sort of the hardships and the challenges that he experienced within the field of his work, but super inspiring. I listened to his story briefly in the past, and I was like, you have to be on my show. So I'm super excited to have you on this podcast with us today. Kevin, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and your childhood?
Okay, well, I guess my childhood's fairly uneventful childhood. I was born in America, born and raised, and 7 years in Chicago, 7 years in Cleveland, 4 years in Anchorage, Alaska. My father was a chemical engineer, my mom a housewife, pretty traditional family, and he was in the oil business. That's why we bounced around a lot. But it was pretty much suburban America, dusk to dawn, baseball, barbecues, and biking around town. Bookended by an older brother and a younger brother. There was school as well, but school was more in the parameters of my life. I gotta say, I was not always drawn to academics. I kind of preferred more what was happening outside the classroom, outside the window. And it was not a reflection upon the teachers at all. Wonderful teachers, I'm sure. Don't really remember them, but it was just more my own shortcoming, my inability to actually stay focused on something in front of me. So be patient with me today if I drift off as well. It's nothing about me.
Appreciate it. That's really cool. You come from sort of like a background of like pretty like academics, I guess, or pretty successful individuals, like you mentioned your dad. What about your siblings? What do they do for work?
Actually, my older brother right now, he works in special education for kindergarten to first grade. He's been doing about 20 years. And my younger brother is a project manager of sorts.
Wow,
But they all live
very
in my
impressive.
hometown. Most of them lived overseas. My parents have lived overseas as well, but they're all now back in Cleveland. And I consider my Cleveland my hometown. That's where I go when I go back to visit. And my extended family all lives there.
Right. So is that where you spent most of your childhood there as well, and that's where you started work in the social working field?
No, when I was 13 years old, I left, go to Alaska. Not that I ran away from home or took off myself. It was just we transferred up there and went to Anchorage, which is a beautiful, incredible place, Alaska. It was my first real adventure. It was just wild. But after 4 years, I realized how tough it is to live up there. It's cold. It can be bleak. And then I brought me back to the Ohio State University, and that's where I went to school and majored in criminology and psychology and kind of led me in the direction I'm in right now. And then I stayed in Columbus, Ohio for a while, and that's where I was a social worker, which we're going to be talking about mostly today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you actually studied criminology and psychology. Um, would you say that child social working, the work that you did, is closely connected with that field, or is criminology mostly focused on a different kind of? Is it a different strand to an extent?
Well, you could say it's a different strand, but a lot of the kids I was working with are kids that grew up in homes where there's a lot of illegal activities, just unhealthy environments. And these children, the paths they were going on, for example, when they're very young, it's maybe classified as ADD, ADHD, which can go to an antisocial behavior, which goes to some other label, which eventually becomes a criminal. So a lot of these kids were headed in that direction due to the environment they're in. So there was a connection. But I know myself, I originally went or was looking towards criminology and psychology because I wanted to go into forensic science. That was my dream when I was younger. But then I learned that I lacked the discipline as well as the memory to go into such a field, which basically means I just wasn't smart enough for it. So I had to redirect, and that's when I focused on criminology and psychology to become a detective. That was my next plan. But I thought, being a police officer for 5, 10 years, what an experience that would be. But the more I was in university and surrounded by a lot of people going in that field, and the more I learned, the more I heard, I wasn't a big fan of the atmosphere. A lot of the machismo, a lot of that, but I think it's the blue wall, that silence. It's a brotherhood. You stay silent. You protect each other before you're actually protecting the people you should be out there serving. So it just really was not what I was looking for.
Mm.
So which eventually
Like it's
brought
really
me into
not as glamorous as they make it seem in the TV shows and in the movies that we watch online, right?
Yeah, I guess I never got to that point. I mean, where the
Right.
detective, I imagine it'd be a tougher life. You'd be more of a cynical person, but you'd be making a difference.
Mm.
It'd be fascinating work. What I learned in criminology. And like, for example, my two favorite classes in the school, one was penology, and that is the study of prison systems. And I was fascinated by that. And number two was abnormal psychology. And just the more unusual a state of mind can be, the more fascinating I found that.
Mm. But would you agree that like most of the cases that we see today in like crime cases that we see do stem back from childhood, from an upbringing of the child?
My experience, if I had a guesstimate, I would say 80% of the kids I worked with had issues due to poor parenting, an unhealthy environment at home. The other 20% could have been due to mental health, just falling with the wrong people, drugs, alcohol, but the majority of the time it was most certainly a product of their environment.
That's really sad if you think about it as well, right? Because it's like it's a known fact that I guess people know about, people study about, people read about everywhere. We've seen enough cases as well to be able to verify that the childhood upbringing can really lead to this. Um, Yet the irony is that there's never enough intervention at a young age, or again, like the goal is most often for reintegration rather than really trying to help that kid and put them through enough care so that they can sort of undo that trauma at the time they're experiencing it.
Yeah, there's the dose of reality. For example, if a lot of the kids I dealt with, you would take them out of that environment, put them into a facility of some sort, maybe putting them to a family member's home, a healthier home, and they'd go through a lot of different treatments. Some of the family members, let's say the parents might have to go through some case plans as well, some requirements, some whatever it might be, some kind of counseling, some kind of alcohol addiction, drug addiction programs. But the biggest challenge was once these children finish these programs, we put them right back into that environment. In children, yes, they can change. Parents, much less. So when you're putting a child back in there, everything you've taught them, you've given them some tools, some strategies. They have this in their wheelhouse. But their wheelhouse is still that of a 12-year-old child, a 14-year-old child, one who's fractured already. So how can they actually apply what they've learned? It's nearly impossible. And a lot of what we've done is just sabotage or undermined by the parents, by the caregivers. So it's really tough where you see a child maybe start to blossom, and then you put them right back in that environment, and it's just crash and burn. And it is tough. But I know when I was a social worker, the ultimate objective was reunification, which means get the child back with the family. And often I disagreed, and that was not the healthiest choice. But that was a policy at the time and could still well be. But I don't think it was healthy for a lot of our kids.
So like when you were working through this and like learning about the field and stuff, like what did they say?
You mean when I was studying or when I was actually a social worker?
Oh, both. I would like to know, was it different when you were studying it versus when you were working? And
When I was studying it, it was so much more theory. So there wasn't a whole lot about actually, grassroots. You're out there in the field and you're actually realizing, oh, this is the ultimate goal. Yes, having a whole family is really important, but rarely were these families whole families. And I've seen some whole families that are just as unhealthy as a fractured family. But I saw it more when I was actually in the field and learning that was the policy. Going to the courts, that's where it kind of helped pound home what was actually required, what was expected, even though it went against everything that we believed we were doing, but we had to meet that goal. because that was often a case plan. When you're involved in a case, all right, here, there are 3 things that are a problem. There are 3 things we must work on, 1, 2, and 3. And that is ultimately to get a child back home. If the parents are following what they need to do, which is fair enough, what is expected, even though they might just be jumping through the hoops, they know the game. A lot of our kids know the game as well. They manipulate, they use it, they say it's a means to an end, not actually internalizing what they're going through, but just saying, all right, we need to finish this case plan. We get our child back over here. We can move on with our life. And it would be nice if it was in a positive way. And sometimes it is. I don't want to sound overly cynical, but it seemed less so. It wasn't the norm.
Right. So can you give me like a ratio, an approximate, like out of 100 cases, how many of them would reunification actually be in the best interest of the child, where it would actually work versus the other way around?
Ooh, well, that is tough. Off the top of my head, an actual number out of 100 cases. Well, as you find out later on, I left the field due to how cynical I was, how lost the hope that I lost for these families, for the system. So my number is probably lower than it should be, but I'd say it's definitely lower than 50%. Maybe, but unfortunately, a lot of these kids, there wasn't anywhere else they could go. Or let's say, for example, there might have been that aunt or that uncle who was willing to take that chance. And the child went in there and they sabotaged the home for whatever reason they did. Maybe because, they're dealing with something internally. Maybe so like, this is not my mom and dad. You're saying bad things about my mom and dad. I know they're not good people, but they're my mom and dad. And that's hard for a child to understand because that is who they know. It's their mom and dad. It's tough for have somebody else come in saying, what your parents are doing is wrong. I'm going to help you out. And some aunts and uncles would not directly say. They'd be very careful to protect that child's parents because they know how much that child loves that parent. Even though that parent might be hurting that child, destroying their future, a lot of these aunts and uncles who are in a better circumstance, they were trying to do their best. But, let's say once they were robbed themselves, they were assaulted by these children who are hurting so much that they have to eventually put their hands up and say, we have our own children we need to worry about. We need to worry about our neighbors over here. We cannot get involved. So then you lose that option. And the next option is going into Franklin County Children's Services. We are basically your custodians. And it's not the healthiest choice either, because often the kids go through a group home, and group homes aren't the nicest places, especially the older they get, the tougher they are.
So I do want to get into your story, but I just have one more question, which I think
Please.
would be really interesting. Can you tell us what, from your experience, would you say is acting in the best interest of the child?
Okay. Sounds like an easy question, but it's extremely complicated to offer any kind of answer like that. But the best interest of a child, it all depends on who you're asking. If you're asking the child, of course, they have their own perspective. The parent, they have theirs. The court has theirs. The social worker has theirs. Maybe a guy from the South is different from the guy from the North. Maybe it's male versus female. There's so many different factors involved. But I do believe it is important to have the child involved. At school, we often teach, student agency, having the student having an opinion, having the student share. What are your thoughts on this? Do you feel this is actually useful for you? What is the big idea behind this? But at the same time, these are children. Their brains aren't even fully developed yet. These are kids who've grown up in usually horrible situations where their emotional foundation, their social foundation, psychological foundation, academic foundation, they're all stunted in so many different ways for them to actually make decisions about what is healthy for them. They've never learned what healthy is in the first place. So it's so hard to actually say, well, what do you think? And a lot of these kids, let's say, for example, when I mentioned earlier about sending a child to a home, maybe an aunt or an uncle, where it's more of a stable environment. There are rules to follow. They must get up and go to school in the morning. They will be questioned about maybe what they're dressing like. Maybe if they're smoking in the home, is that okay? Is that not okay? There aren't as many rules. And I'll be honest, a lot of kids get used to not having rules and they enjoy that. A lot of kids actually also appreciate those parameters and stability of having rules. But those who never had them before, to go to a home that has them, that's a whole different universe. So they could say, well, it might be healthy for me, but I love having a cigarette when I want to. I love to go into mom's packet. She gets some marijuana in there. She's not going to notice if it's gone. Why not? But my aunt and uncle's home, I'm like, gosh, I got to dress like this. I got to walk like that. I got to eat with manners. It's exhausting. So is it always best to ask a child? Of course, you want to get their feedback. You want to offer some options for them.
Mm.
And we always did. For example, if you do this, this will happen, or you could do that. And of course, kids
Mm.
like, yes, I've seen that. I know that. But at the same time, is that really an option for me? So being realistic, I've taken kids before for job hunts. Let's say when a child in at least the state of Ohio, if they drop out of school at 16 years old, by law, they must find a job, a part-time job. And I take kids around trying to help them find work. First, with working the issue of you got to pull your pants up. Mr. Kevin, that's a style. I said, I'm sorry, you're not going to get my Jeep with your pants hanging down and your underwear sticking out. They're clean underwear, Mr. Kevin. I'm sorry. My Jeep seat's cleaner than your underwear, I'm sure. I can go back and forth. Let's go for the interview. The interview is important as well. You know, how do you carry yourself during an interview? Well, Mr. Kevin, I want to get a job at this company or that company. I said, but you don't have a high school degree even, let alone the communication skills to work with someone. Yeah, well, I'm not working at McDonald's. Well, you got to start somewhere. I'm not working at McDonald's. No way am I making minimum wage for this, that, and the other. I could sell
Mm.
drugs and make a lot more money. And honestly, that can become a challenge for us because from their perspective, and I'll be honest, to a degree, it's quite true, they can make a lot more money selling drugs than they can working part-time job at McDonald's. And I say, well,
Mm.
it's not a healthy living for you. You might get killed. Yeah, well, people around me get killed, Mr. Kevin. That's kind of part of life. Yeah, but your life may not be a long one. Yeah, well, that's pretty average. Well, I mean, you go to McDonald's, you got that uniform, you got that pride. Pride in wearing a uniform. Just gonna make a nice leather coat if I'm selling drugs over there. I'm driving a nice car. I got an SUV. So it's what they've seen versus what I've seen. And
Yeah.
it's hard to convince them otherwise because that's what they grew up to. Their role models are in that area.
Mm.
So to say, let's give the child too much agency is not the healthy, it's just based on what they've learned in their own background.
Yeah. Very well
Hope I didn't go on
explained.
too much of a tangent.
No, no, no. I think that's great actually, because yeah, that's true. Like, how do we know whether the child really knows what's in their own best interest as well, right? Like in their head, they're thinking, like the brain hasn't even fully developed, right? So it's like, how do you decide which one or the others, right? At the same time, you can say that, I guess as well, one of the big reasons behind reunification is with the idea behind it is being for the best interest of the child. And oftentimes they may ask the biological parents, like, thinking that the parents know what's best in best for their child as well, but then in reality that also may not be true. So it really requires like really analyzing things deeply, and I don't know, following your gut to an extent as well. But that doesn't work. There's rules, there's protocols, there's red tape, there's bureaucracy. So yeah, I can imagine that being really difficult. What inspired you to get into this field?
I wish I had a wonderful story for that one. But honestly, I don't. Like I mentioned earlier, forensic science. Then from forensic science, I went to becoming a detective. And then once I graduated, I had a friend who was in this field. And to me, social work, it never sounded like anything sexy or flashy, whatever. It was whatsoever. It's like, social work. I'm really quite sure what that means. So I looked into a
Mm.
little bit more. And it wasn't something that we learned about in university. Didn't come across any of my classes. Besides, let's say, reading a case study in social worker ABC went there. And I just assumed it was just some old miserable person in a bad sweater. That was the perspective I had. Kind of what I had about school counselors at the time. And I had to adjust that. And yeah, when I got in the field, there were some old people wearing bad sweaters who seemed pretty miserable and they were social workers. But at the same time, did it interfere with their job? No, not necessarily. We can talk more about that later on. But what inspired me? I know my parents have asked this question. They said, we don't come from a family of social workers. And I said, well, my brother's in education. My little brother did education for a while as well. I'm in education now myself. There
Mm.
must be something. But I did have a maternal grandfather. And I know he was one of those people just, you see him in the streets and he saw a homeless person, he would offer him something. He'd talk to the person. Every 2 weeks, he would go to this place called the Poor Clares. And I don't know if it was a sect in Catholicism, what exactly where they were. For me, I was a 10-year-old boy, and these people took a vow of silence and respect to God. And I'd go there, and I found them pretty creepy myself because just these old, kind of dowry looking women who would not speak. My grandfather, he'd go to the local supermarket and just load up on groceries and bring them to him because they were called the Poor Clares, which mean, in addition to having a vow of silence, I guess they took a vow of poverty as well. And I asked him, I said, Grandpa, why do you do this? He's like, well, why not? They're doing a good thing. I really couldn't understand what they were doing, but he felt they're doing a good thing and he didn't mind supporting them. He wasn't getting anything out of it.
Hmm.
It was just a giver. And he said, it's important to help other people who are struggling. And maybe that seeped into my mind at some point as a little boy, and it stuck with me. But
Yeah.
yes, there was really no big inspiration going into social work. It was just a job that was offered. And I thought, okay, well, it's going to help from what I learned in criminology and psychology. And when I started learning more about it, even just from the interview itself, it just started to fascinate me. And
Interesting.
that really began to
Yeah.
appeal to me. So just one interview question was enough to make me go, oh, wow, this is really what I want to do.
Wow. And I mean, you stayed in that field for quite a while, isn't it?
I wouldn't say quite a while. It was only 4 years.
Okay, that's pretty significant. And considering the kind of nature of this work, from what I've heard, we've done an episode as well previously with a social worker, but slightly different, adult protective services. But she was saying that they would take on a lot of cases at once, and she mentioned not being paid very well, recalling not being paid very well, and also being overworked. Is that true?
It's a large, there's so many different kinds of social workers out there. So you asked about that social work comparison to myself as a child welfare caseworker. They're two very different areas. And overworked, it was pretty strict. It was 40 hours a week. I don't remember having to work more hours than 40 hours. And if let's say I had worked till midnight, maybe, for example, there was a time when at 5 o'clock the shift is finished and they said, Kevin, your child, he's 18 years old now. He's been released up in Cleveland from the mental health ward, and he's still a ward of us, so we need to go pick him up. I said, that's a 2-hour drive. Yeah, I know. Go up there, fill out the paperwork, bring him back, and I finished about 1 o'clock in the morning. I went straight to the bar, had 2 shots of whiskey because it was a tough trip with a kid who was kind of Columbine level, where he was a person who was highly intelligent, from a very wealthy family, had their own butler, which is very unusual in America. But just the way he would talk would make people uncomfortable. And having in your car, I'm not a probation officer. I don't have handcuffs. Just somebody sitting in my Jeep with me for over 2 hours can be a stressful occasion. But that's the next morning. They said, Kevin, just go home. You shouldn't even be here. You worked over five extra hours. It's a flex time. Go home. Take care of yourself. So in that sense, we didn't work overtime, at least in my field, in that time, in that job in Columbus, Ohio. But from the pay, yeah, it was abysmal. It was way too low for somebody to have a degree, a bachelor's degree, not to mention the work that you are doing. And I remember many times I'd have friends who were lawyers, who were engineers, who've done very well, and they combine the BMW. Oh my gosh, Kevin, what you do is so admirable that I wish I was like you. I respect that so much. But look at this BMW. Woo! I'm going to go to the Bahamas this weekend. I'm going to have some fun of me. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I found what they're doing. I was like, yeah, actually, I would not enjoy what you're doing, but the benefits you get out of it are pretty incredible. Where mine, yes, I'm trying to make society better. I'm sacrificing for the greater good. But at the same time, not seeing what those sacrifices are actually for, they were tough to swallow. And you get that paycheck. And you often, a lot of your clients are making more than you would.
Yeah, that's true. And especially at that time, like you were fairly young, fresh grad from university at that point. I do feel like even for me, like looking for that bigger purpose in life kind of came a little bit later on. When I was young, I did enjoy the flashy things, or I did want the flashy things. It was after that I did some introspection. Did I realize that, hey, like, I want to dedicate some time to making a difference. I can imagine that being really difficult. That's why I say 4 years. It's a long time. It doesn't sound like it, but
yeah, I do think you have a lot more younger, naive people who join social work. I was 23 years old when I started. And when I came into the field, there were people, let's say in my unit, each unit had about 6 people. In my unit, there were a couple older people who were probably in their 40s, 50s, and they just seemed highly cynical, just didn't really seem to care very much. But at the same time, if I came up with a case, I'm like, oh my gosh, this child needs this help. He needs, oh my gosh, what's the problem? Well, it's this, it's kind of, when I deliver what's going on, it was always a mess. When they'd say, come on, take a deep breath. Now show us exactly. Where's the case plan? All right, there's issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. What are you going to do for him? Well, I think about these services. I'm thinking maybe this ABC service might work the best. All right, Kevin, there's actually 17 different services out there. Which one is the best one for it? So even though they might have sounded cynical, which they were cynical, burnt out, which degree they were burnt out, and their hopes in these kids actually succeeding through these programs, minimal at best. but did not hold them back from doing their job. Did
Mm.
not hold them back from sharing this wealth of knowledge they had with all the different services that are out there. And that was invaluable. So at first it's like, I don't want to become like you guys. At the same time, it's like, maybe I need to become like you guys to
Mm.
survive. And
Yeah.
maybe because I put too much passion into it, I burnt out too early. And that's why I only lasted 4 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think to an extent like they had become slightly desensitized to what was happening as well to these kids just because they'd come across so many cases in their career?
I believe certainly so.
Mm.
And maybe some of them, when they came in the field, they already were that's just who they were. A lot of my coworkers, I'd say pretty much half the coworkers I had came from rough backgrounds, came from broken families. And maybe that was a motivating factor for them and why they entered social work. So then maybe they're much more realistic when they entered. Where I came from, like I said, a very stable background. I was very sheltered as a child.
So
So
yeah.
Alaska was my first big exposure. But again, I was living in another suburb. I wasn't living out in the bush
Mm.
in, let's say, an Aleutian community or Talinga community where I was seeing poverty and depression everywhere. No. So maybe it was also the shock value of that.
Mm.
But I know maybe my first couple of weeks in the job, my supervisor at the time, he said, remember to maintain a work-life balance,
Yeah.
which you hear in any field.
Yeah.
And he said, if you lose that, you're going to lose your job.
Mm.
And I had a girlfriend a pretty steady girlfriend for about 4 years. And about a year and a half, 2 years into the job, we went our own ways. And I think that's kind of where I lost that balance.
Mm.
It made me reflect and think, okay, I can understand the importance of that. 'Cause when you go home, how can you turn it off?
Mm.
And a lot of the older social workers, I think when they went home, they had their separate lives
Right.
and they could turn that off. Or myself, I go home and I'm laying there, maybe with a drink, maybe just watching something, maybe without a friend, but just thinking, is little Tommy going to shoot himself in the head? Because his last words were to me today, Mr. Kevin, if you put me in that home, I'm going to use this gun. I'm going to shoot myself in the head. Was it a game for a lot of the kids? Sure, it might have been a game.
Mm.
But you never know when Tommy could have been playing. He could have actually done it himself.
Yeah.
Or actually, Tommy actually did want to do it. Or actually, Tommy did do it.
Mm.
And it would come down on yourself and thinking, wow, did I just kill somebody? So that would weigh pretty heavy.
That's super heavy.
Or maybe if you had a family, you go home, you have your children, you have your whatever you do after school, after work, you can kind of compartmentalize and put Tommy away and focus on that. And that way you can kind of keep on going for many more years.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Like compartmentalizing is such an important aspect of especially certain kinds of jobs.
Absolutely.
What about with the organized, like with the company? What were the things that they were doing to make sure that everyone that was there with the right purpose, with the right intention, and also getting that self-care? Is it just giving you guys enough days off or leave to have that? Or were there other things sort of put in place in the organization to support their staff?
Self-care. I don't really remember hearing that come up besides my manager, that one-time supervisor mentioning that within 2 weeks of coming in, you need a work-life balance. That was probably the only time it's really come up. The word self-care, it's very common now, but back then, in our company, it was about 100 employees, and I think about 90 to 95 were female. So there's very few female. It's a very female-dominated field. And he'd said, Kevin, some of the self-care, and he did not use the word self-care. He goes, you want to survive? Do not go to the lunchroom. That's what the women eat. They'll eat you alive, let you know how horrible of a human being you are because you're a male. Oh, dear. So just have your lunch alone in your car, and you'll be okay. And that was probably not the healthiest form of self-care, but I did go in the lunchroom a few times. I realized, oh my gosh, yeah, I should not be in here.
Really?
I'm going to go, and I had a Jeep Wrangler, which was nice. It was a fun way to get around. And I'd often just have my lunch in there or just go to some fast food restaurant or pizza shop and have a couple slices, just be by myself. And that was my self-care. Did I think of it as self-care? No, I just ended up a guy who was just hungry, needed some food and some quiet time. But the company, I don't remember them having any kind of events about self-care. There was some safety training, of course, but about how to be a better human, how to process emotions, things we learn about now. No, I don't remember any of that taking place.
My God. I really hope that that's different now, especially in your field. I mean, in other kinds of fields, even teachers, we get talked about, self-care and stuff. And in many other kinds of jobs, right? That is like a hot topic right now, like looking after your mental health and your mental well-being. And especially in a job like yours, where you guys are being overworked and you're dealing with very heavy cases. Were there other things that were put in place just to motivate you guys? Like not self-care necessarily, but like motivation. Incentivize.
Let's see here. Well, the salary was certainly not an incentive. We had a mentor in our unit. So when you came in there, the mentor would kind of help guide us. And I thought that was when I first joined an incentive. You're going to be learning from somebody. They're going to be guiding you the whole way through. And in fact, it's actually only the first 30 days you go through them. You don't actually have your own family. You don't even start your own caseload until you're there with that person for 30 days, getting familiar with the system, how things work. And you can go out there with them to see a family. You're going to go to prison for the first time with them. You're going to go into court and represent the agency when you're not a lawyer, usually the first time by your mentor. And I found that as an incentive, like, okay, I'm going to really actually learn the ropes through somebody. And I was 23. They were probably about 28 years old. So they had a few more years experience. They were a kind person. They were understanding, similar background.
Yeah.
And after that, you're more or less on your own those 30 days. Well, good luck and figure things out. So the incentive didn't last very long. Another incentive was applying what I had learned in school. I'm not a big guy on theories. I think theories are important. You need to learn them. That is the fundamentals, where these things are coming from, but actually how to apply it in a practical way, that's more my specialty.
Yeah.
And how to connect with these people out there. So I'm coming from a very different background. And I've been in homes before where somebody says, are you a 45-year-old African-American female with 3 children, one of them who has got a crack addiction right now, the other one who's pregnant with a child on the way? I'm sorry, ma'am, I've experienced none of those things. Then how do you have any right to come to my home to tell me how to be a proper mother? That's
Wow.
ma'am. And of course, I'm flustered. I don't know what to say. But at the same time, I learned over time, it's not about trying to convince a person that I know more than they do. But based on my experience, based on my training, this is what you need to do to get your child back. This is what you need to do to hopefully get your life back on track. These are the systems that are in place. These are the programs that are available. Let's work together to make this happen. Wow. And trying to find the correct verbiage to meet somebody without talking down to them, without disrespecting them. Yeah. When you are a 23-year-old white male in the home of a 45-year-old black male, that's a major insult to the black male. Why are you in my home? A white man's coming in the home. The man is coming into my home. And it's a tough thing. And I've been very direct people say, I know you don't want me in your home, and I'm sorry to be in your home. And sometimes there was one case where I think he was a good person. And he was trying to discipline his children. The kids were 16, 14, and 12, I believe. And he's physically disciplining them. In the state of Ohio, that is illegal, especially when he's leaving marks. But he was a military man. And when he told me why he was doing it, what he was doing it for, I respected him. And his kids respected him. They loved each other. It was a happy, healthy home. But he was so insulted I was in his home because of this, representing the government, the man. He wanted me out as much as possible. And I tried to convey why I was there. And let's do A, B, and C so I can be out of your home as soon as possible. And he respected that. We had a good working relationship. At the end of the day, he shook my hand. He said, thank you very much, and I hope to never see you again. And that was completely understandable. I agree and could relate.
Wow, that's really difficult.
But I guess going back to the question about the incentive, for me was how to apply what I learned in a healthy, natural way and to be a better human being that could communicate. And I did know there was another social worker who was top of her class, highly intelligent, IQ up here, but unfortunately EQ was quite low. And I would hear her over the phone discussing with clients what theories matched their problems at home. You're clearly dealing with theory ABC, and I could hear the client screaming on the other side of the phone, what the fuck are you talking about, theory ABC? Who are you? Speak like a human being. What is wrong with you? And sadly, that person lasted 3 months. And they're crying every night they went home. What is wrong with me? Why can't they understand me? I said, well, you're not connecting at their level. Just you need to talk down to them. I said, no. You don't talk down to people. You just learn how to communicate in a way that they're going to comprehend with you. But you were talking down to them by using theories because it didn't really connect. They're not textbooks. They're human beings. Yeah. And that was an incentive for me. But I don't know if that's really what you're asking.
No, that's great. About. That's really well put. Can you just walk me through how does it work when you are assigned a case? Is this usually you'll get a call in and that case then becomes yours? And are you dealing with that one case or that one client for the rest of the time until the case is closed? Or is it just if you get a call on that day while you're on shift, that is a case you're dealing with? How does it work?
That is a question. Actually, probably something I haven't really thought very much about. I don't know who the Wizard of Oz up there is who's deciding where these cases are going. But in our building, it was divided. Let's say there's 100 social workers. Half the building was for infants and young children, so about 0 to 8, 9, 10 years old. And then there were older kids who would go from, let's say, 9, 10, all the way up to 18 years old, the age of emancipation. And I worked with the older kids. So my caseload could have kids from as young as 8 or 9, all the way up to 18. But of course, sometimes if I had a case open on a, let's say, 16-year-old boy, and then something happened to his baby sister who's 1 year old, then she also became part of my caseload. But typically my focus was on the older kids. So let's say that day in the court, a kid stole a car and he was 14 years old and he's caught in the possession of drugs. Came to the court opened a case on this. We're going to request that Children's Services gets involved with the family because the parents did not show up that day. We have concerns. So maybe if the parents do not show up, and we don't know who actually is a caretaker of the child, he might become a ward of the court, a ward of Franklin County Children's Services. And they say, okay, 14-year-old, he lives in this part of Columbus, Ohio. So I mean, there's 4 different offices we had at the time. And we were in one of the sections. Okay, he lives in this location. We're going to put him in this group. Okay, this unit over here, they've not had a new case in the past 2 days. We're going to put them in there. Okay, then it's into my unit. All right, Kevin, you have the lowest number right now, or this is an angry male child. We're going to put him with you because you seem to do pretty well with young, angry males. I said, okay. And then it opens up with me. And I will traditionally be with that child until the case is closed. So I've had some cases that went for the entire 4 years that I was a social worker. Does that help?
Entire 4 years. I didn't even know that there would be a case that can go on for 4 years. How so? Like, I mean, if something is being dragged on that long at some point, like how does that work?
Let's say, for example, this case in particular is one case, and it was probably one that would slowly broke me over the many years because they just manipulated the system, used the system. But if it's first, I was given the case file, looked at it and said, this, I think maybe a 14-year-old boy, maybe 13, and he had anger rage issues. He'd basically lose control, see only red, then wake up covered in blood. And that was my first involvement with him. I went out and met him in jail. And he was about my size, a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot meaner looking, and just a poor, tough kid who had a tough life. And then I'd meet his mother. I'd go to the home. And I picked him up from jail, drove him to the mother's home, got to meet the mother. And she was an ex-stripper. And I know during the meeting, he whispered to me, Mr. Kevin, I'm really embarrassed to ask you this, but my mom's asking, does she have a chance with you? What is going on in here? Oh, my. Oh, dear. Oh, geez. So that's just a normal situation. But he had a younger brother who was about 11 years old. A really sweet kid. Looked up to his older brother, even though his older brother had a lot of rage issues. But that was his older brother. Loved his mom. Everybody needs a job. Stripper, whatever your job might be, I'm not going to judge you for that one. Your lifestyles besides that, yes, of course, it's just natural to judge someone. But look at each other, they seemed happy. But of course, the mother had some drug issues. Mother was a prostitute as well, not just the ex-stripper. The son had alcoholism issues, social issues, could not get along with anybody, had no ability to control his rage. And the little brother was just starting to drop out of school, or at least not attend school. Older brother was rarely going. And that's how I got involved with that family. And then we'd have to find the boy, for example, an alcohol rehab center. We'd put him in there for 30 days. And he knew at first, I think it wasn't just playing the game. He's like, okay, they actually do want to help me. I want to help myself. And he'd learn the strategies. He learned what to say. Let's go through this. And after 30 days, we'd all meet. Mother'd be out there. Mother's like, yeah, I'm making changes. We prepared everything for him. I go to the home, make sure that his bedroom is clean. Everything is safe. There's no alcohol, at least that I can see in the home. There's no weapons sitting there on the table. They're at least hidden. Mom showed me once. They're underneath her panties. I was like, that's not the safest place for him, Mom. Let's work on that one. After 30 days, he's saying everything he needs to say. And I think I even saw him wink at Mom at one point. And it wasn't like, I'm going home with you, Mom. It's like, I just played the system. And unfortunately, maybe you'd say, okay, let's keep the case open for another 30 days, monitor how things go. And if they follow the rules, we're going to close the case. And usually after 2 or 3 weeks, something else is going to happen. We stay involved. Okay, and I'll get the other 12-year-old boy, and he's making some choices that are not the best at school. Kevin got to school and see this boy. We start getting involved with him and the older brother, and there's always something else coming up. Then there's a fight in the home where the 15-year-old boy gets in the fight with the mother's boyfriend. Then you're back out there again, and then he goes to jail for 4 months. And then in those 4 months, the case is still open. And then the mother says, I don't want to have this child anymore. She gives up custody. They become, a ward of the court, and they are part of social services. We have to find them a group home, hoping to get them adopted at some point. And that often does not work because most people do not want a 15-year-old child who is full of anger and rage to be in their home to be adopted. And it just goes on and on and on and on. But this home in particular, this family, I should say, they were one of the small things that kind of chipped away at my hope in the future. And not one of the bigger cases that broke me, but was just a steady, constant taking the piss, taking advantage of the system, and just eating away what we can do, and just saying there's just no hope for people like this who are just going to burn any bridges possible. And the money we spent, I'm guessing, is probably easily $200,000 in this one child, this one family.
Yeah. That's really sad.
Yeah. Sorry to sound so bleak.
No, I think it's important that we do hear these things, right? These are conversations that are really, really important for people to listen to. I think as difficult as they are, parents out there listening, other social workers out there listening, anyone, who has a big power, decision-making power, happens to listen to this episode, could be really, really useful in figuring out ways that we can, and I will definitely ask you this question later on as well, and what you think can be done to actually make changes to help different kinds of kids. But I'll definitely leave that to a little bit later. I want to know though, about a case that really, really impacted you, either positively or negatively, something that stood out to you that until today you hold close to you.
Okay, we'll start off with one positive. You might question the positiveness of this, but this is a child. He was a 16-year-old boy, and he was being sexually abused by his father. And due to that, they removed the child from the home and put him with an aunt. And that's when I got involved with the case. And it was my job to make sure that the aunt's home was a safe home for the child, but also, once again, the ultimate goal being reunification, creating a case plan that would allow the father the opportunity to potentially have his son return and live with him again, even though there has been a history of sexual abuse. And if you might be wondering, well, how could we ever allow a child back into that home? Quite often the case, a child will not testify in a court of law that their father, especially a male child, that their father's been abusing them. Because let's say, for example, you're in the courtroom, and the judge will ask the child, have you been sexually abused by this person, so-and-so, your father? And it's a terrifying experience for a child. And also, so that's a person, I love them. That's all I know. That's the only family member maybe I have. And yes, they are a monster. They're a horrible human being, but they're also my father. Just that multifaceted outlook. How can I say anything? They usually say, no, nothing. And if there's no actual evidence, physical evidence, and there's no word, then often there's no charges that are pressed. So then you have to work on getting that child back in with the parent. And I know part of the case plan was supervised visits. So the father would come to my office in his little tiny room, and he'd sit there with the son. And I'd kind of sit there in the door frame and just kind of watch the whole idea of a supervised visit, make sure it was healthy, it was safe, the kid felt comfortable, and just letting them have a conversation. Was it natural? No, by no means. I mean, you could think if you were an adult, a parent, and there's somebody in the doorframe watching you both have a conversation, it was highly invasive, but it was completely required due to what happened to this child. The child was terrified, did not want to be there. The aunt did not want him there, but she understood the court proceedings, and she said, okay, I'll bring him there. Another one was I had to go to the home to make sure that it was actually a safe home. With the boy at one point, when it's no longer supervised, but unsupervised visits, the boy, could he go to this person's home, this father's home? Was it a safe environment? I mean, it was in the projects. And then for the projects, for us, they said, don't go there after nightfall because you might get shot, you might get robbed. But often our clients worked, so it was kind of those catch-22s. You had really no choice. You said, okay, well, yeah, I don't go. And then the father's going to say, well, I couldn't finish the case plan because the social worker never came and visited. It's not my fault. It's Children's Services' fault. So I went out there and I remember visiting the home, and I find a small apartment, maybe a 2-bedroom apartment. And I walk in there and there's a woman just prone flat on the ground in the bedroom. I couldn't tell if she was dead. And I was like, whew. And I dropped my little briefcase on whatever bag I had, just hoping to make enough noise where she might lift her head up or something. Because I was feeling a little anxious. When I dropped my bag, she kind of lifted her head and went, maybe she was just stoned. Maybe she was drunk. And the man looked at me, the father, and said, "You're a man. You don't have needs?" Ha! And I said, I just went, "Oh, okay, let's just sit down, please." And we're sitting on a sofa, and I had to go through and ask him a few questions, and she's over there. I could see her breathing. It wasn't like he clocked her over the head. She was just there, which is weird. I remember him walking behind me at one point, and every single nerve fiber of my being just tensed up because I was worried he's going to whack me in the back of the head and wake up tied to a post and just God knows what happened. And once he walked around, I was like, how did I even allow that to happen? Should I have jumped up immediately and said, "Why are you walking behind me?" When he's like, it's his own home. He's walking around, but you're in a high risk situation. But anyways, the home was okay enough, minus the human being on the floor that was semi-conscious. And going back to court, let's say a month later, and they asked, the court said, "Okay, social worker, what about the home? I mentioned this. I mentioned the woman on the floor. Father has been going to all the different visits." And the child was terrified. The aunt was terrified, saying, "Oh my gosh, it sounds like the dad has met the requirements. Are we going to take this child out of this home, this aunt's home, where he's blossoming? He's going to school now. He's dressing better because he has confidence in himself. He's combing his hair. He's feeling good about himself. When I see him, he'd smile. I go to the aunt's home. She's like, look how happy he is." And he was happy. But they could all be for naught if he has to be reunified. And the court actually asked me, the social worker, which is very rare because the court generally did not like social workers. They'd tear us apart in the stand. Often it was a very humiliating experience. And they said, "What do you think is the best option for him? He has completed the case plan. Do you think the child should return to the father?" And I was like, oh my gosh, you're asking me. And the aunt's looking at me, just going, pleading with her eyes, "Please, please, please don't allow this." And I said, "Your Honor, if it's up to me, he stays with his aunt where he's doing wonderful. He's blossomed in so many different ways. I just see positive growth. I do not see that if he returns to his father's home." In the court, the judge, I don't know if she went, "Here, here, here," whatever she did, but she said, "Okay, we will stay with this. The child will stay indefinitely with the aunt. We will revisit this in 6 months' time." And just seeing that boy put his head down, just relief made me feel so good that I was involved and could make a decision that would help to keep him safe. And when I left that courtroom, within 3 minutes, the father was, this close to my ear. His lips are basically against my lips. And he's whispering, he goes, "I will find you and I will kill you." And I was a younger guy, and I remember I didn't handle it very professionally, but I just said, something along the lines of, "Fuck you, asshole, I'm waiting for you," because I just wanted to hurt this man so bad. That's not the kind of person I am. I'm not the Punisher. I've never in my life even physically hit somebody. Bear hugged, yes, but never with my fist hurt someone. Imagine tearing these people from limb to limb. Oh, all the time. Absolutely. And it was my own form of therapy. And the father, he drifted away, which is often the case. But that was a pretty good moment for me. Not having the dad threaten me with death, but seeing the boy and knowing he's going to be in a better place.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like it could be really, really like risky doing something like that works in the best interest of the child. But then again, you're running the risk of the parents or someone else being like completely, completely angry. Also, how did you manage to keep your cool around this man every time you walked into his apartment? No, not only him, but any other family members, parents, where you'd heard that they were violent towards their kids or, sexually abusing their kids. How did you manage to keep your calm and cool around them? Without wanting to actually, I mean, I know you mentioned that you thought about it and it was your form of therapy, but like, what did you do to stop yourself from acting on that?
Well, I think one of, as I mentioned earlier, it's just not who I am. I'm not a fighter. I am all bark, no bite. I got a pretty good temper. I'll shout out because these guys probably know how to fight. So maybe that was something that kept me step back. Number two, most of these homes had guns, and I've seen the guns in these homes, and I'm not a fan of guns. I don't carry a gun. As a social worker, you're not allowed to carry a gun. So maybe that's also kind of kept me to how to not use my emotion, how to use my rational side, my brain, even though my heart's thumping. I get in my Jeep just going, oh,
Yeah.
oh dear. But when you're actually in the situation, you take that deep breath. So, going to home, let's say the police are behind you because it's a known violent offender. The police might accompany you, and the police make you knock on the door. And I'd say the policeman, I say, well, why am I knocking the door if they are potentially a violent offender with a gun? And they said, well, it's because you are considered non-threatening. And I said, yes, but you are considered threatening and you are behind me. So if they shoot through me to get to the threatening presence, they said, well, we just hope that doesn't happen. I said, well, I'm glad. I appreciate your concern. And it only happened 4 or 5 times that the police actually had to escort me to a home. But quite often I go to another home, maybe it's a new home or a home somebody doesn't want me to be there. There's always individuals that are coming and going these places. You don't know what's going on. I could knock on a door and somebody screams, get the fuck out of here. And there's nobody fucking home. I said, well, who are you? I'm fucking nobody. I said, well, you got to be somebody. And again, I was younger. So, of course, you're a little cockier. You're not thinking as much as you should be. But at the same time, there could have been a gun on the other side of that door. It was just, maybe they think I'm a drug dealer. Maybe they think I'm a member of a gang, an opposing gang. You don't know. But again, I was younger and a bit dumber. So I probably didn't always think about the situations I was in. Another situation where I remember it was a 16-year-old male and his grandmother. And grandmother's almost having a heart attack as she's screaming at him. He was screaming at me. The father was in the way to tarnish the boy, as he was saying. And I was going, what is going on over here? And I remember my supervisor was blowing up my beeper. I had a beeper back then, not a phone. She's saying, get out of the house. Get out of the house. It's not a safe situation. And I could hear him in the kitchen scrambling for a knife. And I think it was part of his show as well, because I think deep down, he knew, I was a social worker. I'm there to help him out. I'm not there to punish him. I'm not there to hurt him. But he's just an angry child who had a tough past. And eventually, father came. Father, threw him over his head, was smashing him on the ground. Furniture was flying everywhere. And I told my boss, I finally called from the house. Grandma's like, call the house. Grandma's sitting there going, here's my phone. Call your supervisor. And I said, I can't leave. There's a grandmother over here. She's going to die at any second right now. This kid and his father, they're going at it. And she said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm hoping to keep some kind of a calming presence. She goes, well, that's definitely not happening. I said, I know. And she goes, the police are on the way. And I saw the police pull up on the front lawn. They came in the home. The kids hitting the police officers. I was like, whew. So that day was a tough one. I'm sure I had not too many, but a few well-needed drinks when I got home.
My God. Could you talk to me a little bit about this concept of fight or flight? Because I feel like, when you were in your previous job, you were constantly in this fight or flight mode. Is that something that you still carry with you today? And is that something that positively has sort of like helped you, or does it sometimes inhibit you even today?
You get that, fight, flight,
freeze. Yeah.
And freeze. I think there's almost more of that one in between. There's a freeze. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to fight. I'm just going to stay calm. And just maintaining that composure can calm a lot of people down. So they see if you're being calm, more likely they will be calm. And I'm a bigger guy. I'm 6'2". I'm 180 pounds. And that does make a difference, I think, as well. So people don't know, what is my background? Am I a dangerous individual? And I wouldn't tell them, hey, I'm not a fighter. Hey, I've never been in a fight in my life before. Hey, I'm actually crapping my pants right now. I'm terrified. I don't say those things. So they might think, maybe this guy knows what's going on. Maybe he's a threat to us. Maybe he's a danger. And maybe that helped to calm things down. So to me, it's more maintaining a low level freeze. While internally, yes, there's a bit of a fight and a flight, but also I'm there to protect this kid. It's my job to make sure that they are safe. So if I keep calm, they might keep a little more calm. And maybe everybody will be slightly more calm. But I know for my job as a school counselor, it does help. Where I've had some kids, screaming, shouting, kids just in my face, just going, trying to do the old, I'm pretty tough. It's a 5th grader, 4th grader. So it's not as effective, especially the thing I've seen as a social worker before. They'll say, Kevin, how do you remain so calm? Well, it's not going to help to lose my cool. And yes, I raised my voice before. Yes, I've lost my temper before in a classroom. Try not to. Try to just keep that presence. But I think in life in general, it's helped me a lot to just bark over bite and just to keep calm. If you just get an argument with somebody, like, he has raised his voice. He does sound pretty angry. He's not using foul language. He's not directly insulting the person. He's making it pretty clear he's not happy. And those seem like very effective tools versus just getting up into somebody's face. So you see in Shanghai, this is often the number one weapon people use is the finger to point. Pointing a finger at him back and forth for hours on end. It's very offensive. And it's not going to get you anywhere. So how to express yourself in a way that's not going to lead to the other person losing face. Where back home, there's respect. You're giving respect. Everybody wants respect. When you don't have anything, you don't have a house, you don't have a car, you don't have nice clothes. All you have is that feeling of respect. Even though it might be manufactured, you got to respect that.
I love that. I love that. And it seems like it's something that, either it's been like a skill that you've refined over the years because of your job, or whether that was, built into you from birth. But it's such an important sort of like skill to have in the field that you're in, but also in life in general. Because I mean, what is I can't imagine or think of anything else that can be better than de-escalation, right? In a situation where, but yeah, I'd imagine for a person with a lot of anxiety, a lot of it does come from this sort of one point living a state of fight, flight, or freeze, being in that sort of traumatic situation, and then how to maneuver that situation is really, really challenging, especially when you're in a very, very high intense, high energy sort of environment, right?
Well, I try with my kids now, putting it more on a micro level. When I work with kids doing character classes at school, and we do the whole flight or flight, and we also do you got the wizard brain and the lizard brain, the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex. And for kids, why we always get into fights, what happens when we get all upset? Okay, because your lizard, your amygdala, your emotional center is just out of control. So your thinking brain is just lying flat on the ground. How do we calm down enough? How do we take some deep breaths? How do we step away to the point where that lizard's actually manageable? The wizard can come back over there and your brain is actually somewhat able to actually go through the thought process, what's going on. And maybe that just came from what I did when I was younger as a social worker, not really realizing what was actually taking place. But now upon reflection, maybe that was doing, how was I doing it? I really don't even know back then. But now trying to teach my kids this simple tool for when they get in a situation, which is hopefully not as scary as it was as a social worker, but to them, it could be just scary. I'm in front of a classroom. I got to speak in front of a class for 5 minutes about a topic I didn't prepare for. What am I going to do? I'm not going to do anything right. Take a deep breath. Splash some cold water in your face, whatever it might be, to help reduce that fight or flight need and just kind of freeze for the moment. Just a brief moment, of course.
Yeah, I love that. Can you tell me what was that turning point for you that made you decide to leave? Was it a particular case or was it anything in particular?
Well, I mentioned that one family for 4 years. That cases like that just slowly wore me down, I should say. But there was one in particular, and this was the hardest case I had. And it was right towards the end, which makes sense. That's probably the reason why it was towards the end. But it was a 16-year-old boy, and it was domestic violence, theft in the home, lived with his mother, stepfather, and actually he was 17 years old. And he had a girlfriend and a baby. His baby was about 6 months old. His life was going nowhere. And basically I got involved. I helped him to drop out of school because he really wanted to get a job. And he got a job at a bait shop part-time. And that was a court requirement. And a few months later, you go back to court again, and the court requirement was to show record that he had lawful employment. So I called him up, said, you need to get out there and do this. He said, okay, Mr. Kevin, no problem. I'll do it tonight. Tomorrow's a court hearing. And the next morning, I got a call from my supervisor saying that he was shot and killed. And he was a kid that I worked with about 6 months. We started developing a small relationship. I remember coming out of the school when we helped to sign him out of the school. There's a teacher who was stuck in the snow, and him and I pushed the teacher out. And just had a few laughs, little conversations like that, and seeing over those few months how he started getting a better relationship with his mother and with his stepfather, and just getting to hold his little tiny baby who was 6 months old, getting to meet his girlfriend. Yeah, it was very on the minimal surface level relationship, but just seeing he's more than a case number. He was a human being. He was a kid who was in a tough situation, and he seemed to be turning things around. But unfortunately, he was shot and killed. And at that time, I didn't really know what happened. My boss just said, just prepare for it, Kevin. I just want to let you know about that. You lost one of your kids, and it's a tough thing. And I remember showing up to the office, and we always have a police officer on site to offer added security. And the police officer said, hey, I heard about one of your kids getting killed. And I said, yeah. I told him what happened. I called him up. I told him he had to go to the office, to his bait shop to get proof of his employment. And he's like, oh, so you basically killed him. And me, whoa, what? And he said, I think he was trying to make a joke of it. It's a dark sense of humor. But I took it to heart because indirectly I did have him killed because I was the one who sent him to the bait shop to request this statement of ours. And it was hard, painful. And of course, my supervisor later said, Kevin, you know that you had nothing to do with this. And I know I didn't, but it was still hard to accept that. And it came out later on during the trial that when he went to the bait shop, he told the boss, hey, I need hours, proof of employment. But she was apparently doing something illegal in the shop. And she was worried that once he got to the courthouse, he would tell the judge what was really happening. There was no motivation for him to do that, but she was paranoid. And she pulled a gun on him and shot him. Unfortunately, he had his own gun. So many of my clients had their own guns. She took that out, planted it in his hand, and tried to make it look like a robbery gone bad. Fortunately, she was found guilty. She went to jail for about 30 years. But 5 days later, it was his funeral. And I was just terrified. I've never been to the funeral of a child before. And I was worried also, are they going to accuse me of killing their son? Was it my fault that their son lay in a casket? And I remember driving around the funeral parking lot 5-6 times, just terrified. And finally got the strength to go in there. And I saw the mother and I didn't know what to say. And she gave me a big, giant hug. The stepfather also gave me a really big hug. And they said, hey, thank you. They didn't even say, we don't blame you. We don't blame you for this. Because I don't even need to say it. They just said, thank you for everything you've done. You were there for us. You knew our son. You knew that, the good qualities he had, not just the negative ones. But then going over and seeing him lying in his coffin with a fishing rod across his chest because he was still a child. And then looking over and seeing his girlfriend. I remember her asking me, what are we going to do? She's sitting there holding her little 6-month-old child. And I'm like, I have no answer for you because I have no idea what you're going to do. So that was a pretty big breaking point for me. And I think that case more or less broke me going in there, seeing what happened, hearing that police officer. And then also when I was at the funeral, looking over and seeing his biological father, shoes and socks off, cutting his toenails and joking with his boys about God knows what, but just saying, maybe that's why your son is in a coffin right now, because you never took part in this child's life that you're in there. Maybe he's got his own demons he's dealing with, but there was just a lot going on. And then I think a month later, I had one other child, another case. This is a 12-year-old boy, and he was a repeat sex offender who was, of course, molested and raped when he was a child, when he was 8 years old. But he had sexually molested and raped maybe 4 or 5 victims each time. Each victim like 40, 50 times. And he'd bounce around.
He was 12 years old?
Sorry, he was 12 years old. Yes. And he spoke like a little girl. It might just be he hadn't gone through puberty yet. And that's why he spoke that way. But he'd go from sex offender home to sex offender home, program to program to program, often getting kicked out because he's doing things that are inappropriate. We'd have our meetings. He'd sit there and talk about a ghost who'd try to saw my head from my shoulders. And he said, he's halfway through your neck right now, Mr. Kevin. Oh my gosh, I cannot bear to look anymore. It's so disgusting. And I don't know if he had underlying mental health issues that had not been diagnosed, or if he's just having a good laugh because he didn't know what was going on. But at one point, nobody would take him. They thought he was such a high risk that they had to keep him in jail. And the court once again asked a social worker, which again surprised me. We have 2 options. One is to keep him in jail indefinitely. And they said, like a caged animal, which I thought was not appropriate, or we release him to home. And his home was his father, who was a single dad, working father, and below average IQ, which meant he didn't always make the best choices for raising his son. The people he'd invite to his home weren't always the healthiest choices to have around his son. And I thought, if we release him home with an ankle monitor, which will ensure that we can track him, when father's not home, the boy will more than likely find a new victim. He will rape that victim. We're going to have one other child that's now broken and damaged. So I thought, we need to keep him in for the safety of society, the better of society. And yes, in a way, we're giving up on him temporarily, but that is a choice. And I remember telling the court that, and they said, okay, due to the court social worker's response, we will keep him in jail. And the father came by, and the father said, not in a threatening way, this wasn't he was a pretty gentle guy. He just said, you gave up my son, just shook his head. And I remember thinking, you don't know what I'm really thinking, Dad. Because actually I thought, no, we don't want to give up on your son. We need to euthanize your son. And For me as a social worker to think that we need to euthanize a child, that was for me to think, okay, I'm no longer for this field. I need to move elsewhere. So I think those two cases are the ones that basically sent me over the edge and thought, okay, it's time to.
This is so difficult. How did you manage to, over time, start to build trust in human beings again, just in people in general?
Good question, because I know I didn't mention this, but probably my last 6 months, whenever I'd see anybody, I see a child playing outside, I always think, and what is he up to? Is he casing the joint? Is he trying to find out, is anybody home right now? He's playing ball in front of the house, but it's because he wants to see if no one's home, I could tell my older brother to come by and he could rob the place later on. Or I see a man playing with his son. I'm like, is that really his son? Is that a potential kidnapper? Is he doing something wrong to his child? Seeing a young girl dressed up, oh my gosh, in 2 years, she's going to be maybe a prostitute. Maybe she's going to be going down this route over here. What poor choices, or is she going to get raped by this person or that person? It wasn't healthy mindset. So I decided to leave the profession and go somewhere so far away that I would understand nothing that was taking place. And I did love working with kids. I still enjoyed that. It's like, I want to work with children, but I want to work with children in a place that they are not going to be so broken, that there's going to be a chance to possibly help these kids in a way that will see them grow positively. So I chose to go overseas in English as a second language, ESL teaching, which brought me to Korea for 1 year. So I thought if people are around me saying horrible things, I'll have no idea. So it can't even bother me. So I chose to go deaf and mute in a way. I lost the ability to communicate. So I live in a different country where I couldn't share and I couldn't get myself involved in situations happening around me.
Have you ever been to therapy yourself or tried to see if there's a possibility of some kind of like trauma, like post-traumatic stress disorder that you've potentially been living with? Do you think that's a possibility?
No, I know one time when I was dating my wife, we went to a psychiatrist doing a study on cross-cultural relationships. And I remember sitting in the waiting room. My wife was in there being interviewed and just having somebody sit next to me wondering, what are they here for? Are they being diagnosed for something? Do they think that I am mentally unstable? What is happening? I really don't know. And that's probably the closest I've ever come to seeing a therapist. And I'd be honest, I have not really felt the need. You mentioned, for example, any kind of PTSD. Have I seen any? Maybe because it's not obvious to me. Maybe it's just become who I am. But maybe it's also due to my own upbringing, which was such a stable upbringing, and having that family around me, even though I don't think I shared the struggles that I had with my mom and dad. Talked about the challenge of being a social worker, because it was a choice I made. I wasn't doing it to be a Joan of Arc. I didn't want to go home and say, oh, Mom, the sacrifice that I make this so hard over here. No, that was so good. For Christmas, we're talking about, of course, I tell them some of the wild stories and things I experienced. But I was very easily to maybe switch it off at that point and just go, and that was just my family. Maybe that was enough to ground me. And then going overseas to Korea, maybe it was another way just to completely forget about it and live overseas, and it's a whole nother world. Or maybe if I stayed in Ohio, I could have gone into a different profession, or maybe I could just gone in a different direction. Maybe I would have gone into management. Maybe I would have gone into private counseling. So it would have been harder to move beyond what I experienced.
Sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So right now you are a counselor for students in an international school here, as far as I know. How different is it for you now?
It is extremely different. One, because it's clinical. Man, let's say as a social worker, 20% of the time when you're at the desk, and I'm not a desk person, it's very hard for me to sit still for an all day. Let's say, for example, data entry, whatever it might be. With this, as a social worker, you're in the prisons. You're often going to the homes. You're in mental health facilities. You're in the schools. And I really enjoyed that. And I think as a counselor, it's a mini world of that, but it's all in safe environments. For example, I'm at my desk at the school for about 20% of the time. The rest of the time, I'm in the classrooms. I'm on the playground. I'm in the hallway. I'm in my little counseling room with a kid. But these are all, like I said, clinical in the sense that I'm not in the person's home. For example, a child maybe who's dealing with, mothers and fathers who might be verbally, physically, or emotionally abusive, or just absent anyway. If I was in their home, it'd probably be a cleaner home, because the kids I'm working with are coming from middle to upper class neighborhoods, where in America it was lower class. So the environment of the home is a big difference, even though it might be similar problems, but the despair and poverty, you don't see it as much, because maybe it's got a nicer veneer and polish over here. due to the
Interesting.
financial status.
And also, I guess to an extent as well, like the parents would be more open to listening to the feedback that you would provide because, you know, if they are going to be spending that much money to send their kids to a good international school, they obviously have to an extent a good intention for their child too. I mean, they wouldn't allocate that kind of money that way if they didn't really care for the well-being of their child. So perhaps, I mean, I could be wrong in saying this, but the kind of challenges that these kids may be going through could more be because out of a lack of awareness maybe the parents have, not with a negative intention.
Yeah, it could be. I think he's mentioned as well, and because he's, the tuition's quite high at an international school. So a lot of parents sending their kids here, these parents have come from better backgrounds. They have higher education. Where a lot of kids back in the US I worked with came from parents who often had very little education themselves. These were, 16-year-old kids who are having their own baby. Now these kids are 35, 36 years old, but they're still 16 when they're their baby. They still never learned as they're growing up. They did not have proper parental figures teaching them this. Where a lot of kids I work with now, the majority of them don't come from situations like that. Most of the homes are pretty stable. The parents did not have them when they're 15 years old, 15, 16, 17, 18. The drug issues do not exist. There could be alcohol issues. And now for absentee parenting, it's often due to work. For example, during COVID-19, a lot of parents were locked out. So you might not have a dad for 3 years, 4 years, which is a major impact for a child, but it's very different than your dad is in jail. Or your dad lives on the block, doesn't want to see you because he doesn't love you because he doesn't even know you exist. So that is a massive difference as well.
Did you notice any like cultural related differences for that children may be having, or the way that it's being handled as well? Could it be different also culturally?
I think for our kids, the biggest issue is anxiety, the stress that comes with the amount of work they must do because they have just so much homework, so many after school programs, and the need to be the best because it's a very competitive society. Where back in the US with my kids as a social worker, they weren't so bothered with academics. So their stress was just the violent home environment they lived in, not as much you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to accomplish that, and the other. So that's very different in that aspect. But a big culture difference is mental health in China. It's still something you shouldn't really talk about. So I know when some people hear, wait a second, my child's seeing Mr. Kevin. Who is he? He's a counselor. What? Why is he seeing a counselor? No. Academics is what matters. My child should not be removed from class. They should be in the classroom. So of course, we always try to not interfere with their education because that's what they're there for. That is the primary goal. But for kids who are struggling to focus, they cannot concentrate. They cannot sit still. Or because they cause so many problems in the classroom that nobody likes them due to their a challenge emotionally, socially. And but my child's a leader. I said, yeah, but your child, unfortunately, the behavior they show is not leadership skills. It's hurting their friendships. Kids do not like them. Kids find them loud. Kids find them obnoxious. The teacher is constantly reminding them to do this, to do that, and the other. That is interfering with their education. They're coming to school and they don't want to be here anymore because they feel that nobody likes them. And if they don't want to be at school, a place that should be a safe environment for them, are they going to want to learn here? No, they're not. So we need to look at this issue over here. How can we make them more socially, emotionally well adjusted? And that will actually help them academically as well. So trying to convince a parent of that is pretty important. Another one is not so much nowadays because there's not as many one-child families. But still, even there's only 2 children, the parents still say, my child is the center of the universe. And in their home, that's understandable. So let's say there's a problem at school, and they say, well, other people are being too sensitive. They need to understand my child's needs. And I say, as teachers, as educators, yes, we should. We do our best. But the children around them, they're other human beings as well. They're other children. So you might think that your child is the center of the universe when actually your child is just a single star among millions and billions of other stars all floating amongst each other. We need to work on, find a way that your child, your star, can work with those other stars. And if they are actually triggering those other stars in a way those stars are pushing back, how can we reduce those triggers? At least make your child aware of it so they can say, all right, well, actually, that's who I am. I don't want to change, or maybe I could adjust it slightly over here because I actually want to be close to those other stars and I don't want to be pushed away. So trying to convince parents of that isn't the easiest, but it's also my job to find the correct language for it, the correct verbiage to make that clear without insulting parents, without just jumping and saying, oh, your child has, issue ABC, let's put medication on them, because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. That is not my job. Ethically, it is wrong. Let's say explain that what I can do, what I'm there for, what we can do for your child, and if we go down further down the road, what might that be?
Very,
I don't know. That might have been a little
I like
convoluted at the
that
end
though.
over
No,
there. I
I think that's really
apologize.
well said. Okay, so I will end this interview with one last question. With your experience in the U.S. as a social worker, um, what do you think like big decision makers need to make in order to actually protect children better? I One thing that I think from what you've said so far is, the courts need to listen to social workers, because the social workers are the ones that are very close to the children. They build a relationship with the children and the family, and they're always in and out. That's something that I would think based on what you said. But let me pass that question to you. What do you think needs to be done on a larger scale?
Scale. Wow. Yeah. That would require, I think quite a few drinks and a whole night of conversation with a little bit of research beforehand to actually think myself. Let me say it out loud. Think closer about that. But yes, I think it's listening to people. Communication is so important. I'm sure you've talked to any teacher in the world, they say the same thing. People listen to the school board. Is the school board listening to teachers who are with these kids 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day? So myself as a counselor, who is the most important source of information? Often it's the teacher, because they see the kids so much. And if I don't listen to them, I say, well, I'm the counselor. I understand what's going on. How am I going to understand that without getting their feedback? Then again, if I don't listen to the child, how am I actually know what's going on? The child's like, nobody listens to me. Nobody cares what I'm thinking. How important is that? And of course, there's the parent as well. Parents like, yeah, but I've been with the child for the past 10 years, 12 years. I can see how they might have gone up and down. I can help you to reflect as well. So I guess it's talking to every single person involved, not ignoring anybody, but at the same time being realistic. Let's say if everybody has an equal view and equal opinion, that's also not necessarily the case. For a mother who has lost 3 children already, has some serious drug addictions, has violently hurt her child, or the father who's raped their child, is their opinion as valid as the person, the social worker, the judge, the teacher, the aunt who's trying to help? I don't think it is, but we try to make everybody happy, make everybody exactly equal, and everybody's opinion is validated and real. I don't agree. I see every life is equal, every life is the same. I don't agree. I've seen some horrible people that I don't think deserve to live. And that is maybe callous, maybe cold, but I think it's reality. But how to bring that up in the government, how to get that involved in our system,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really don't know. I wish I had an answer. I think if we were more decent human beings in general, I think unfortunately the average goodwill just is pretty limited. And then people are worried about. I got my own children to worry about. I got to make sure my son, my daughter are doing it over here. I got to expend energy for somebody else's as well. People just don't have that, and I don't blame people for that one. That's understandable. But until the average goodwill of the human being standing next to you increases, I don't think the things are going to change for any time soon. So I think it's just we got to become better people, and then generally society as a whole is going to lift. But that's very idealistic, very rainbow lollipops and
Yeah,
whatnots.
100%.
That's I was a social worker before. I'm
Yeah.
still an idealist, even
Yeah.
though it might be hard to find
No, it's
someday.
true. And I think also like definitely these systems, some of them are still very archaic. They run on, a way that it was run back in the early 1900s, 1800s even. And it's just not applicable in today's world. The kind of issues that we have that kids face and deal with today are so different from back then. So why is it being treated the same way? Right. So yeah, definitely it's like fundamentally needs to be changed. The entire law book around like, helping little children and, looking at what's really in the interest of the child's, best has to be revised all from the beginning. Right. But yeah.
Absolutely. So where to even begin with that, I couldn't tell you. I know for a lot of my kids, when they were reaching the age of emancipation, when they were 16, 17 years old, and I saw no future for them, I often told them, join the military. And looking back on it, that was 2000, let's say 1999, 2000, 2001. And then what happened next? The war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. And I wonder, did some of my kids actually listen to me? I don't know if they actually listen to me, but did they choose that route? Because it's an option for a lot of uneducated people who lack discipline, but they get an education. They can learn discipline, but also they are going into a dangerous situation. Are they the kind of people you really want representing you in a war? Because they are also dealing with their own issues over there. But I thought it was an option. But if I could do it again and I was actually leader of the world in general, maybe having something similar to the Peace Corps, where the options are not just the Peace Corps, but also piece of education. You must, volunteer for a year as an educator. You must volunteer for a year in the military, but you have these options available: education, military, Peace Corps. The government pays for it. Where does this money come from? I have no idea. That's another challenge. But I think it teaches us civic duty in the importance of giving back. And maybe we have more of that in us. We can kind of start giving back more and helping people in the future, which could transfer down to the lower levels. But again, I could use a whole bottle of whiskey for this conversation, about 5 hours of time.
Amazing story. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your experience and stuff with us. There's so much that we can take away from this, and just the story in itself, right? The essence of what you were saying. It's so empowering and powerful. So thank you. If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Chris Trzynski, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.
Chris Trzynski, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.